All right, hello everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name is Brett McGowan. I'm a developer advocate on the Google Cloud Platform. And today we're going to talk about how to build apps for Google Home, this little device right here, as well as Google Assistant, and some tools that maybe can help you build chatbots for any platform, whether it's Facebook Messenger and so forth. So to get started, I just want to talk a little bit about what is Google Assistant. So Google Assistant is basically how you have a conversation with Google and all the things we know how to do, things we know about, and help you get things done in your world. So Google Assistant takes a lot of forms. You can use it on your phone if you have an Android phone. Most modern Android phones have Google Assistant built in. There's an app for iOS, and then also the Google Home device. In fact, as of today, there are over 100 million devices right now that are using Google Assistant, that have Google Assistant. So it's a huge audience. And not only is it across Android, iOS, and the Google Home device, but the Google Assistant is going to come to even more devices, so things like smartwatches in your car through Android Auto. So stay tuned for those. I should have mentioned there's a link at the bottom, bit.ly/home-workshop. So we only have 30 minutes. It's going to be really challenging to follow along as we go through this workshop. You're welcome to try, and if you get stuck, we can circle back afterwards. But maybe the best way to do it will be try and follow along if you can, and if not, you can just watch me as I go through the workshop. The link there is at the bottom, bit.ly/home-workshop. So now we'll talk about actions on Google. So Google Assistant is how you as a consumer talk to Google, and it knows how to do things, like it knows how to add things to your calendar, it knows how to tell you what the weather is in New York City. Actions is how you as a developer can put your functionality into Google Assistant to help you connect with users in new ways and help them get things done. So actions is how you as a developer customize that experience. There's already a lot of organizations using actions on Google to create custom actions for Google Assistant. You can ask Domino's to order a pizza. You can ask the Washington Post for times. There's a whole bunch of, there's a fun one called Dr. Doggy where you can learn about your dog and what you should and shouldn't feed it. So what does it look like? So here's Google Assistant in sort of a text form, talking to it interactively. So you would say, OK, for example, say I made an app for Node Summit that maybe would tell me information about the schedule, what's coming up, what are the different topics, things like that. So I would talk to my Google Home, and I would say, OK, Google, let's talk to Node Summit. And then it basically hands control over to your app. So if I built this Node Summit app, I am now in charge of this dialogue back and forth. And so I can ask it different things like, help me pick a session on Kubernetes, and so forth. And so we'll walk through, and I'll sort of live code how to build something like this. So what is the flow of an action? How does that all work? So it starts with me as a user, and I'm going to talk to my physical home device. If I don't have a home device and I'm interacting directly, like on a phone or a watch, then maybe it skips this first step, and you interact directly with the assistant. So this little multicolored, tadpole-looking thing is the Assistant logo. So that's Google Assistant. So, and you can do a lot of things, like I said, just with Google Assistant. Google Assistant knows how to do a few things. But at some point, you want to hand over control to sort of you and your app. And what does that look like? So for that, we have an Actions console. So it's console.actions.google.com. This is how you create an account to create your custom actions for the Google Assistant. And I'll show you that in a second. So at that point, once you've created a custom action, like I said, the assistant hands over control to you and your app. And you are now in control of all of the interaction with the user. And you can respond in a whole bunch of different ways. So what does it mean for your app? What does that look like? So the first step is you need to process what the user has said or what they have typed. And that's like language processing. So if I say, hey, Google, what's the weather like in San Francisco? That maybe is the same query ultimately as, hey, Google, is it hot in San Francisco? Or is it cold? Or what should I wear? What's the humidity, right? A lot of these are sort of related, and there's different ways to say things. Difference between hello, hi, greetings, what's up. You kind of all want those to map to the same entities. And API.AI is a tool that lets you do that. So for example, you could say, what Kubernetes sessions are there if I had a Node Summit app? And it would know, OK, Kubernetes and sessions are certain entities that I want to extract and pass to your custom logic. So let's take a quick demo of that. So here's the API.AI console. And it comes with a few different intents. So the default welcome intent is basically once the assistant hands over control to your app, this is the first intent that gets run. And so let's take a look at what an intent is and how it works. So there are a few things here. You can name it. So I'm going to call it math.add. And that might be a clue for what we're about to do. And then you can type in a few different ways to say things. So if the user says, what is 5 plus 10? Or maybe the user says, add 5 and 10. Right? Like those are two very different ways to represent the same query. So now what I can do is I can tag these for API.AI to extract these as entities. And there are different entity types. So there's a few built-in ones like language. There's like geo, city, country, airport code, things like that, units. So it automatically detected that these are numbers. So that's good. So I'm just going to call this one number 1. And then the second one I'm going to call number 2. And, down here actually, number 1. Number 2. And then we'll have access to these through $number 1 and $number 2. So this one didn't quite get this, so I'm going to make a little adjustment here. Oops. Add 5, let's say, plus 10. OK. And so that's number 2, number 1, number 2. So now I have two different ways to represent the same query. So there's a couple of things. One, we actually can write a response directly in API.AI. So I can say, the sum of number 1 and number 2 is something important, I'm sure. So this is just text, right? So I can't actually calculate anything in this console. But this is what your action will respond back right away. But it's actually smart enough to know if you only provide certain things. So I can say, if I only give it a number 1, for example, I could say the sum of number 1 is, well, number 1, because it's the same. And it's smart enough to know that if I only say, if I say add 5, right, it will parse down to the version of this that only has one parameter. So let's test it. In API.AI, there's a little try it now. So I can say add 5 and 10. And I'll mix a number and a digit. So FIVE. Oh, I didn't save it. I guess that would help. And then let me name this math.add. OK, save. So in the upper corner, and I also can do it verbally, but I will say add 5 and 10. And it should, right, so the sum of 5 and 10 is something important, I'm sure. And you can see what API.AI did is it actually normalized the FIVE. Since I told it was a sys.number, it actually converted it to a digit 5. So once I get to the stage where I'm running custom code on this, they'll have already been normalized to digits. So that's API.AI in a quick nutshell. But now I want to do more than just echo back random strings, right? Like I want to do some custom logic. So that is where you have a webhook involved. And this can live anywhere. It's just an HTTP webhook. So at the end of this API.AI process, it's going to call a webhook. So once it's echoed back any strings you've told it to, it's going to call a webhook. You can do any custom logic that you want, then hand back control to API.AI, and that will talk back to the user. So for this, I work on Google Cloud Platform, so we're going to use Google Cloud. And specifically, we're going to use something called Cloud Functions. And this is what I work a lot on as part of my day job is Cloud Function. This is our serverless, little lightweight JavaScript functions that run in the cloud. So you just deploy a function. It scales for you automatically. You only pay for when it's actually being used. So this is nice. You don't have to deploy any servers. You don't have to install any software. You don't have to stand up an Express server and pay for it all the time. You literally are only paying for it when it gets invoked. And Cloud Functions is nice, too. It has a free tier. You can do 2 million invocations a month for free. So it's really nice to kind of get started with this. It runs Node 6.11.1. And I think that's mostly all I want to say about that slide. So here's what the entire flow looks like. As a user, I talk to my home device, which is going to pass that along to Google Assistant. Google Assistant is going to now determine, is this something it knows how to do, or does it need to hand control off to your custom action? If it's your custom action, it will hand over to API.AI, which will then parse all of the strings into the appropriate commands. It'll map it to specific intentions. And then it will call your Node server running somewhere, in this case in Google Cloud Functions. And at that point, it's just Node. So you can do whatever you want. You can call any APIs you want. You can do any data processing you want. The sky is the limit, and as long as you're returning back the correct JSON response. Now, the only caveat here is you have to return in 5 seconds. After 5 seconds, Google Assistant will just assume that you've timed out. So whatever you need to do has to come back in 5 seconds. And it sort of makes sense in the context of talking to something. If you say, like, hey, what time it is it? 5 seconds is a lot of dead time. So the user is going to think something went wrong. So it'll just kill your process, or kill the request and return control. So it's just something to be aware of. All right, so let's do another live demo here with Cloud Functions. So here is what a Cloud Functions index file looks like. We're going to require the npm module actions on Google. And this is a nice SDK that lets us interact with the Google Assistant very easily. I believe there's also an SDK for Python, but Node was the first one, which is cool. So I'm just going to require actions on Google. Exports, so this is essentially a request. So this is a little bit of how Cloud Functions works. This is essentially an express function, so request response. I pass it into this API.AI app object that I've created. And then I'm going to map actions to functions. So what does that mean? So here I'm going to action map something to a function. So that action map is going to correlate to the name of our action. So in this case, it's math.add. Hopefully we can see that, make it a little bit bigger. Math.add. So I want to take this string. So when this comes in to my function, so all of the callbacks from any intention or any sort of app flow I have, they're all going to come into this as one entry point. And then we're going to map all of the intentions to separate functions. Does that make sense? So everything comes into this exports.yodabot. We're going to be building something called a yodabot. And then you let the assistant route it appropriately using actionMap.set. So now I need to create a function to handle that intention, so addition. So let me create that. All right, so it just looks like this. It takes app as a parameter, which is this API.AI app. So the first thing I need to do is I need to extract the values number 1 and number 2. So going back to API.AI, right? So this is number 1, and this is number 2, 5, and 10. And we've named them number 1 and number 2. And the way we do that is we call app.getArgument number 1 and app.getArgument number 2. Pass it to parseInt because it will come through not as an. So API.AI will normalize it to an integer, but when it gets to you, it's in JSON, so it's not known as an integer. So we call parseInt, and then I'm just going to write out to the console log. And then what we do is we call app.ask. So whatever we send to app.ask, that is what is going to come back on the other side of the assistant. Whoops. So let's say the sum of number 1 and number 2 is I know we're breaking new ground here, number 2. Okay. So now, does that make sense? So we're going to extract the arguments and then sum them together, and then in app.ask, that was what returns back to the assistant. And if they're on their phone, that's what will show up on their screen. And if they're on the Google Home, this text is what will come out of the speaker. So let's deploy this. Make sure my deploy script is right. In case you're curious what deploying a cloud function looks like. So gcloud is the command line tool for all things Google Cloud. And this is how you deploy a cloud function. You give it the name. So this is yodabot. It's going to be triggered over HTTP. And then stage bucket is basically where it's going to stick the source code. So it's going to zip up all the source code on my workstation, on my local disk, and then upload it to Google Cloud somewhere. In this case, I have a storage bucket called home demos. And what's that? So this is the function here, yodabot. Yeah, I kind of think it might be. I think it might be a Wi-Fi issue. No? Why are we not doing this? Let's try it. Let's just copy paste. Ooh, that's good. All right, try again.
You have to right click and copy paste.
Let's see, hold on. Let's try this. Getting no response, which makes me wonder a little bit if it's the Wi-Fi. So TBD. Let me hotspot real quick. This is really exciting. Live demos. Ain't nothing like it.
We have a hotline right here.
Oh, do we? Oh, okay, yeah, let me plug that in. I have a. Or even better, I will plug in. 1 second. Sorry, let me dig in here. Oops. Actually, maybe I don't have it with me. Crap. Nope. All right, well, that's good. So to be continued. Oh, here we go. So now it's deploying. So yeah, I think it was a Wi-Fi issue. What's that? Oh, yep, thank you. Oh, great. So, so this is where I actually have to do the routing. So I need to do add intent. So let's kill that. And so it did catch it, actually. Thank you, by the way. All right, take 2. So up to 2 minutes. All right, well, while that's doing it, let's get back to the presentation. So so here's the kind of the workflow. This is the kind of a complicated diagram to take in, but I'll kind of walk you through it. So you say, OK, Google, I'll talk to Google I/O 17. So this is an example app that we made for Google I/O earlier this year. And so the Google Home is going to pass that to the Google Assistant. It's going to turn it to text. And then using its knowledge graph and machine learning, it's going to figure out what's the best way to handle that response. So in that case, it recognizes that there's an app called Google I/O 17. It will respond back to the user, the phrase, sure, here's Google I/O 17. So the user now knows they're interacting with your app specifically. And then it's going to call API.AI to actually invoke that action. So API.AI knows to respond with the specific your welcome phrase, hello, welcome to Google I/O. So now the user knows they're talking to your app. So now let's say something specific, like I want to hear more about machine learning. And it'll go through a similar process where API.AI will transcribe it, extract all the entities, run your custom logic, and then respond all the way back with the next machine learning session is blah, 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 blah. So this was an app we built for like figuring out how to get around Google I/O and what sessions you might want to attend. So let's see if that deploy finished. OK, that's good. All right, so by default, in Cloud Functions, you automatically get a fully qualified HTTPS URL. So I'm going to use that as a callback. So I'm going to go to fulfillment here. So fulfillment, actually is already set. So fulfillment is basically when API.AI hands off to your custom logic. So let me save that. And now if I go back to intents, and I go to this math.add, at the bottom, I can say fulfillment, use webhook, and hit save. So now if I try this same query again, add 5 and 10, it should say the sum of 5 and 10 is 15, which is exactly what we put in there. So this is how it actually invoked my, my code directly. So that's great. But we haven't actually deployed it to Google Assistant yet. So right now we're just testing within API.AI. And API.AI is great. You can use it for bots for Google Assistant and Google Home, but also you can use it. It's really popular for like Facebook Messenger bots, things like that. Just the whole ability to be able to parse a sentence and extract entities is really powerful. So a lot of people use it for all kinds of different chatbots, not just Google Assistant and Google Home. All right, so quick thing I wanted to point out. We have about 11 minutes left. I'm going to give away a Google Home at the end of this. If you want to, there's a feedback link. So if you go to bit.ly/home-raffle, I'll put it up again at the end, but in case it takes a second, you may want, if you want to wait to the end, because it's like actually also feedback about the session, I will do the raffle drawing off of that. So bit.ly/home-raffle. All right. So now let's look at a couple of response types that you can do. So actually, you know what? Let me connect it all the way up to Actions on Google. So here I have a simulator. Let me refresh this. So here's where I can actually integrate it. So in API.AI, there's an integrations button. And you can actually just click here to do Actions on Google, and it'll basically say, hey, link me up to your Actions on Google project, so we can pass all of that information along. And once you do that, at the bottom of your intentions, you have the option to do custom actions on the Google things like end conversation. So for example, I have an intent here called thank you, and that is ending conversation. So when I say that, my app knows to terminate, basically, and the assistant knows to relinquish control of my app and then just go back to interacting with the assistant directly. All right, so there's a simulator. So let's try. OK. So the name of my bot was called YodaBot. So I will say, so the way I engage with it is I tell Google Assistant, talk to YodaBot. And when I do that, I've signed out. Let's try that again. All right. It's actually talking to me. I don't know if you can hear that.
You seek Yoda.
So I made it say this little phrase, Yoda, you seek Yoda. I use a picture of a raccoon because we don't have legal rights to use copyright Lucasfilm 2017. So I had this welcome phrase. So I am now talking to the Yoda bot. So now in my Google Assistant, I can say, what is 5 plus 10? And
the sum of 5 and 10 is 15.
All right. So you can see the request and the response. So this is what Google Assistant looks like on the phone, right? And it's a very similar experience on the home device. It's just obviously you don't see the text. So you can actually simulate both. So I can switch to simulating a home, say done, and ask it something similar. So, what is 2 plus 2? Now, it's not going to look that different.
The sum of 2 and 2 is 4.
All right, that's good. That's reassuring. And for debugging purposes, you can see like the JSON payload that goes to your, that hands off to your custom code, and then what's coming back to help debug. So let me switch back to emulating the phone. Say done. OK, so right now we're just doing call and response. I'm asking it a phrase. It gives me some string back that it's either printing out or speaking aloud. And when you talk with the home, that's generally how your interactions will be. But if you're actually interacting on an assistant app, so through your phone, there's additional kind of response types you can have. So here it says supported surfaces, audio output, and screen output. So this is what's called a simple response. It's literally just a string. It prints it out if you're in a chat. It says it out loud if you're on Google Home. For Google Home, you have the ability to do SSML if you want to like really customize like specific pronunciations or inject like custom wave files of like specific ways to say or pronounce things. But we can also do on the assistant a card response. So this is literally a full an image with some additional text. There's a learn more button so they can click it and go to a link. So this is actually really, whoops, ignore the SSML text there. So this is a really powerful way to actually give them the response that they're looking for. And then also on the assistant, give some additional help. There's also something called suggestion tips. So these are here at the bottom. So this is maybe I ask about a person. Like you tell me something about the president. You might want to say, OK, maybe there's some other queries related to it, like how tall is he, where does he live, things like that. So these chips are sort of one-click buttons to shorthand you saying an entire phrase. So if it's a really popular sort of follow-up question, this is a really good way to direct the user in that direction. You can have up to 8 of them. They can scroll sideways if there's not real estate. But this is only supported on things that have a visual screen, like on the phone. And then finally, we have selector responses. So these are either a list of cards that you scroll up and down that paginate, or you can scroll sideways like in a carousel style. So again, you can have graphics, and you can have text and formatting and links to learn more information. So this is kind of the overall process. We created a project using the Actions console, used API.AI to handle natural language, connected it to a webhook, and then we enhanced our, step number 5 there, enhance our app for mobile phones. So let's actually do this with our addition example. So I want to, instead of just giving a simple response of app.ask, I want to do something more complicated. So I'm going to app.ask, and I'm going to pass in a rich response, which has a couple of things. It has a simple response. So number 1 plus number 2, the answer is grammar backwards because it's Yoda. But then I'm also going to add a card. So here's some text about the history of addition, in case you're curious. A title. If you want to learn more about addition, I'm going to send you over to Wikipedia. And then you can also set a header image. So here I have something to indicate like calculating. So let's try and deploy that. Since that may take a second, let me pop back forward in the deck and talk quickly about transactions. So transactions are like multi-step processes in your chat. So something a lot more complicated than I have a query, here's a response. So for example, I want to order a pizza, right? It's a lot more complicated. It's too much to say, I want to order a pizza that's a medium, thin crust, pepperoni, half banana peppers, half jalapenos. I forgot where I am, crap, and I have to start all over, right? That's a lot to give all in one go. So you can kind of walk the user through, and they can be manipulating their order as they go. And so they can add one pizza. OK, do you want anything else? Yeah, I want some breadsticks, whatever, right? So this is a nice workflow that you can maintain state and interact with the user back and forth, so they don't have to just give you all the information in one go. It also integrates with account linking, so they can link their Google account with payment and all that stuff. So if they want to check out, they don't have to say their credit card out loud to their Google Home or anything like that. So here's like another example of walking through. So asking for the address, here's a proposed order, confirm it with them, then they can link their account at the end through their phone, and then you're off. So let's see if this deploy worked. All right, it looks like it did. So now I'm going to ask again, what is 5 plus 100? And we should get a little richer response here, hopefully. It's the joy of the cloud, is we got to get it to it first. Yeah, I think some of it is the Wi-Fi. Should have brought my Ethernet adapter. Come on. All right, well, we'll come back to that. If I pretend to leave, that's when it'll finish, right? So let's talk a brief bit, and we just have a few minutes left, developer workflow. So there is a simulator, which I was just trying to use, but I think the Wi-Fi was having problems, so we weren't able to get the rich response. So this is how you can test it. And again, you can simulate whether it's a phone or a home, so you know that you're switching back and forth between giving cards and additional information correctly. So also, and you just saw it takes a few minutes to deploy my function, right? There's a local Cloud Functions emulator, so I can write code on my laptop, and then instantly it reloads it in the emulator. Well, the problem is Google Assistant or API.AI obviously can't, there's no webhook to your laptop. So you can use a tool called ngrok, which should basically expose the Cloud Function on your laptop out on the public internet, so API.AI can call out to it. And it's a really good way for development. Like literally as soon as I finish typing in my editor, hit save, it's already sort of published through ngrok, so the API.AI can call it. So it helps you create a quick development workflow. Let's see if this works. Server is offline. I don't think that it is. I think that the Wi-Fi is offline. Let's try this again. Resolving host. Well, all right, anyway. So the last thing I want to talk about is discoverability. So if you build an app for Google Home, like how do people find out that you've made it? How do you make them aware? So there's a few ways. In Dialog, through an assistant directory, which is sort of like an app store, and then the links that you share, so you can directly push people to it. So to talk a little bit more about that, in Dialog, there are two different ways. There's explicit triggering, which is, so we built this thing called YodaBot. So I can say, OK, Yoda, or OK, Google, talk to YodaBot. So I know the name of the thing I want to talk to. Talk to Domino's, talk to Dr. Doggy. It directly hands it off to me. Also with explicit triggering, you can, in one go, you can tell it to switch to YodaBot and pass along another command. So, OK, Google, ask YodaBot to translate, I'm from Texas. I was going to make a live code Yoda translator thing, but the deployment's too slow. But that would actually hand off control to YodaBot and do that follow-up action. So in this case, OK, Google, ask YodaBot to add 3 and 7, right? And then it'll come back in one transaction. And then secondly, implicit triggering. So this is fairly new. This is maybe hard to read. This is where you kind of want to tell Google what you want to do generally, and then Google can make a suggestion for an app that might help you. So when you deploy your app through Google Actions, there's sort of there's metadata you can put in there of like, what kinds of things does your app do? So if Google sees you asking for things like, I want to work out, so Google Assistant knows a list of all the apps that have declared themselves appropriate for working out or a useful app. So it can actually recommend, perhaps you want to try, some Fitbit app or whatever. So similarly, tell me a joke, it could recommend a joke app. So that's implicit triggering. That's where the user knows what they want to do, but they don't know what app will help them with that. And then secondly, we have discovery in the Google Assistant directory. So this is literally like the App Store, but for Google Assistant apps. So this is something that you can pull up on your phone, take a look. It's categorized, and so users can discover your app that way. They can click on it, and it actually hands off directly to to Google Assistant. And it's nice because since it's all in the cloud, there's no installing, there's no updating, right? They just literally interact with it directly. There's no sort of deploy update process. And then finally, link to their assistant. So you can actually generate a link to your app that if a user opens on their phone, it will load in the app and make them aware of it. So then it'll actually open up into your app directly. So this is good because you want to tweet out from your app, from your company account, download our app, or start using our app directly. So it's a URL that you can pass around. And all right, so that is pretty much it. Wait, I just want to check one more thing. Did this work? Ah, dang it. I was hoping it would load. OK, talk to YodaBot. And I'm going to say,
OK, get the test version of Yoda bot.
What is 2 plus 5?
Yoda. You seek Yoda.
All right, and if this works, we should.
7.
There we go. So here we go. So now we have a card. So it gave me the answer, 7 the answer is, and then here's that information additionally with the read more, and there's this calculator with a potato. I don't know why, but it was random. So we basically have this rich response we can give back to them. So that's pretty much it. If you haven't done the raffle, do it now, bit.ly/home raffle. Here's some more information. If you want to do the workshop later, bit.ly/home-workshop. And I will be outside with any questions. All right, thank you.